Thanks as always for listening to Fluff and Crunch. In today's episode, because Chris and I have had some scheduling challenges because we are on opposite sides of the planet, I sit down with Al Spader, the lead writer for Star Trek Adventures Federation-Klingon War Tactical Campaign book, which is just about out. We talk about what's in the book, a lot of the new character options, a really interesting section of optional and new rules, and we also talk about the big announcement in Star Trek Adventures-dom, which, unless you've been under a rock, you've probably heard of. But if you haven't, you'll have to listen to the end of the episode. Well, good morning, Al. I really appreciate you taking the time out of your day, your busy day. I know is increasingly busy, and now we learn is probably going to get busier, to come on and talk about this Klingon war book of yours. I really appreciate you giving some of your time.
Well, thanks for asking me to come on. I'm really excited to listen to your podcast every week. So
Thank you.
I'm excited to be a part of it.
Cool. Well, I want to start off before we dig into all things Star Trek Adventures, and especially this book, which I've been interested. I'm such a slobbering fanboy for Star Trek things that I'm interested in all the books that come out. But I'm really interested in this one because of, well, for a number of reasons. But before we jump into that, I want to talk just a little bit about like your gaming background. Like when got you into gaming? Like what was the thing? What was that first thing you look back now and you're like, that was the first game, the first real game that I played that I like, what got you into this this hobby?
I think it was the AD&D Gold Box, which was something that I saw in Walden books.
Oh, that dates me.
Probably when I was in fourth grade. And I was like, oh, look at that dragon. I want this. And I saved up my allowance. I bought it, had no idea what it meant or anything like that. So I started like making characters for Dungeons and Dragons, whatnot. Never actually played until I got to high school. We started playing West End games, Star Wars.
Oh, right on.
Yeah. And in fact, my buddy who we used to play with just found the books that we used in high school in his attic and gave them to me. It was
That's so
really,
cool.
really cool.
That is so cool. So wait, were you one of these people who you made lots of characters and you imagined lots of, yeah, me too.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I wanted to make a character for, every class. I wanted to, again, not really understanding what role playing was, but I knew that who the characters were, and I wanted to try to make characters similar to that.
That's very cool. Yeah, I D&D, the basic set, and then once Star Frontiers came out, so I love fantasy stuff, but science fiction is always that's the bug that bites me. And it's funny you mentioned about the WEG's Star Wars. It came out in '87. I just a couple of years ago, a friend of mine actually my best friend from high school, who now lives overseas. Several years ago, he found in like a box in in a storage container or something, he found a pile of our characters and notes and sent that to me.
Oh man, that's even cooler, dude.
So
like
I have my young senatorial character from West End, that West End version. It's in my giant locker of games in my garage.
Oh man, that's amazing. I'm so jealous of that.
It's so cool. Yeah, those things, it's neat too. For me, like I pick up that piece of paper, I'm like, oh my gosh, like I played games with this like 35, 36 years ago.
Yep.
It's neat.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Good stuff. So really quickly, before we get into the book and Star Trek Adventures, how did you get this great opportunity to work on Star Trek Adventures? Because I mean, honestly, this is like the gamer dream. You know what I mean?
It really is.
How'd you get there? How have you been able to do this?
So when fifth edition dropped, they opened a community created content program where you could write basically adventures to premiere at conventions that were special for those conventions. So I got involved with that with a group called the Roll Initiative. Did like 10 or 12 missions for that. And that kind of went on the back burner. I got a little bit burnt out on fifth edition because I basically ran it every Saturday for 6 years.
Yeah, that'll do it.
Then COVID hit and I started doing some Star Trek adventure stuff online. Specifically, are you familiar with Tabletop Simulator on Steam?
No, I think I've heard of it, but I am a complete Luddite, not necessarily by like choice, but the technology. I just don't do any online gaming.
So Tabletop Simulator is like an online board game space where you
Okay.
can like go and play Axis and Allies against friends. Somebody's like put the map in this 3D space and whatnot. And really, really cool. But someone did a Star Trek Adventures mod for it. And I was like, oh, I'm going to run my game on there. So I was doing that. And this was a COVID had just hit.
Mhm.
And so my friends and I were all sitting around this three-dimensional table playing Star Trek Adventures. Well, I took screenshots
Mhm.
and posted them up on Facebook. And that's when Michael Dismuke saw them and asked me to come on to one of the panels that he was doing for his website. And lo and behold, Jim Johnson also happened to be on that panel. And I guess the way what I presented and what I said impressed them both. And Jim actually just after that had both Michael and I write some mission briefs, and that was our doorway in.
It's crazy. Years ago, I had a gentleman actually who's my favorite high school teacher that I had, and I you know this, I taught for a long
Mhm.
time. I know you as well. Um, his professional advice to me, and this was years after high school and college, and we had actually connected on a professional level, was like, do what you're doing and do it well, and eventually the attention will come your way.
Yeah, I think that's
Yeah.
what ended up happening. Yeah, Jim said we got or I got my writing in early, not on time, but early. And it was always high quality. He didn't have to edit it much. And so that was when he kept asking me to do more and more, and eventually take on lead writer on the Federation-Klingon War book.
That is so excellent. That is so cool. Congratulations. And I
Thank
mean,
you.
and obviously there's a team of people who are consistently pouring good work into this game universe. And so thanks for doing that, because
I appreciate that.
I think this stuff is really high quality. And I've played a bunch of Star Trek games over the years, and this is definitely by a long shot, the winner on so many different levels.
I would agree.
Yeah. So let's talk about this Klingon War book. First up, question: how long is it? I don't have it.
It's about 230 pages ish. It's seven chapters.
Mhm.
And we start, as we do with all of our books, with some player options. And then we get towards the middle of the book, we introduce what the tactical overlay, which we'll get into in a few minutes.
Yep.
And then there's the story, which is the stuff you'll be role playing through. Then we wrap it up with like allies and adversaries and starships.
And when you talk about character options, you are more other species.
So yeah, so we have six species, new species life paths. One of which is the Enar, and then which a lot of people recognize from Strange New Worlds. And then we got five like really deep cut weird aliens that were like in the backgrounds of the
Okay.
movies. So like that's really really cool. To see, there were people that were really shocked at some of the species that we put in there. They're like, "Oh, that's from one scene in Star
Yeah, yeah.
Trek One," like, you know. So that was cool. And then there's like optional rules to play during wartime. So one of
Okay.
the things that we recognized very early on was that Star Trek Adventures, for the most part, we promote it as a narrative game, right? We promote it as character driven, and you can still be character driven while participating in wartime stories, right? I mean, some of the best movies that come out about war are really character driven. So our concept early on was to provide options on how to do that in the Star Trek universe.
Okay. All right. So you got these additional options. You've got, on the back end, the stuff we're going to talk about the tactical campaign, those rules. And I think you're right, absolutely. I mean, you look at things like, great series like Band of Brothers,
Mm-hmm.
is a story about individuals, but it's also a story about war and the individuals in that war. So I mean, yeah, that totally makes sense. I don't think that, if you just want to play a game, if you want to play a war game or a war related game without character, just play a war game.
Right.
You're going
Yeah.
to have
So one of the
character.
things that got added in is something called the scars and
Mhm.
trauma system. So basically, if you experience an event during the war, you can choose to take on a scar, and that can be a physical scar, it can be a mental scar, um, and scars act as like really like negative complications that are attached to traits. So your scar goes in your trait line, and that complication is always there as you're trying to proceed. And there are ways to get rid of the scars through the leveling up system and whatnot. But it's just a cool way to show that and reflect it on your character.
How familiar are you with the scar system from Octoon Cthulhu?
So it's so Michael Duxbury, who wrote the system, said he wants to be very clear that he doesn't want to equate it to like some of the mythos type trauma that you can have. But there are some similarities between the two.
Okay.
This particular system has to do with is really connected to your values. Okay. So essentially, you can gain the benefit of sacrificing a value without actually sacrificing it if you're using your scar. Basically, the value is still there. You're just not following it anymore, and it sticks around. It's an interesting concept that Michael brought into the game.
Well, you get me thinking about actual characters. Like I think about Ben Sisko's interactions with Jean-Luc Picard at the very beginning of Deep Space Nine, and how that clearly having his ship blown out from under him and having his wife killed in the process, all that. I mean, I think that fits the description perfectly. So it's one of those great. It sounds to me like it's one of those great examples that I think Star Trek Adventures does very well of taking something in the system, defining something mechanically, but then using it as this translation into the narrative.
Yeah, and Ben
the two complement one another.
Ben Sisko was right at the front of it when we were designing the stuff, and then Strange New Worlds came out season 2 with M'Benga. They actually showed some more of that type of trauma, and we were like, oh, that was a happy accident because we didn't even know that was coming when this was being written. But we were looking at Ben Sisko specifically when talking about this trauma because he clearly had scars.
Oh yeah.
After that.
Oh yeah, for sure. So when I heard of let me zoom back to the big picture here. When I heard of this book, I thought, hey, cool, Klingon War, all it's of an era that, is not well defined, and not a lot of attention has been paid to it in series and movies and things. It gets mentioned, or at least this time period gets mentioned. But I got to thinking, okay, campaign book. And I started thinking about the Shackleton Expanse campaign book, which I have. And we did a review of ages ago when it came out. How is this comparable to, similar to, different from that? So if someone owns Shackleton Expanse in terms of how the book is put together and what a player or GM could do with it, how does this measure up to that?
So I think this is a campaign book that follows a pretty regimented order because these events do happen in Star Trek Discovery Season 1. So you're telling a parallel story to what Discovery was doing because they're gone for like half the war or 3/4 of the war or whatever in the Mirror Universe. So like this is like wide open territory to tell a cool story, but there are still minor events that are mentioned along the way. So as you are doing this campaign, those minor events are still happening. And it's set up there are 6 basically missions. The war is told in 3 stages: early war, mid war, and late war. And each stage has 2 missions that you play through. And then there are 8 optional mission briefs that you could also turn into missions there. So it's a lot more linear, I think, than the Shackleton Expanse story. But the big thing is this what we've called like the tactical overlay. So if you're familiar with Band of Blades at all, have you heard of that game? So
I've heard like Blades in the Dark. Is it?
Yeah, it's a Blades in the Dark game.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's basically you're a group of warriors that are fighting this never-ending war, and you go out and do individual missions and you role play through them. And then you come to this strategy stage. And the strategy stage is you're starting to look at the bigger picture, like you're looking at the entire map, not just where your characters are. And so we've introduced something similar in the tactical campaign where once you finish a mission, you then zoom out to this like galactic scale assigning assets type role playing thing. So essentially, you start playing admirals, and you generate assets in different ships and different characters, and you say, "All right, well, something's happening over at this system, and it looks like this asset can handle that best. So you send it over there," and that plays out in turns as well.
And then I'm assuming then you would, so you do that as a phase sorts,
Mm-hmm.
and then you would move into the next mission brief or mission within that 6 mission sequence that you just talked of. So it's this kind of like iterative, I don't know if it's an iterative process, but I mean it's like an alternating process.
Yes.
Big
Yeah,
picture,
it's a
little
zoom in, zoom
picture.
out type thing.
Wow.
You have the option of so when you are playing through the strategy phase, you've got all these points of interest that start popping up, which are little problems that you got to deal with.
Mhm.
You have an option if you want to role play through one of those points of interest if you would like,
Okay.
using one of the mission briefs that are provided in the
Oh,
book.
slick.
Yeah. So
That's
like
oh.
for me, like when I'm playing board games and I see like something that gets out of control, and I'm like, there's no way I can deal with that. If
Mhm.
you see that at your table, you're like, that's the mission we're gonna role play.
Mhm.
And then we'll use our assets for everything else.
That's interesting. You know, did you ever play Pathfinder,
Yeah,
like first edition?
yeah.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
played first edition more than second.
Yeah, yeah, me too. I've played second edition all of one session, and that was quite enough. Uh, did you ever play I know I've mentioned this a bunch of times on the show, but did you ever play through the Kingmaker AP?
So I've never played through it, no, but I've heard about it and I've
Okay.
heard people talk about it. And I was actually going to ask you the question
Oh,
if it seems like similar to that.
it does actually, because the 6 book series in that the kingdom management rules pick up in book 2. And
Okay.
for the remaining 5 books of the series, unless the players are extraordinarily unlucky or extraordinarily dumb, the kingdom is going to grow. But the idea then is that as a group, you in a given month you spend like half or so, maybe a little more than half the time. The idea is narratively that is the player characters are doing kingdom stuff. They're like the king and the leader of like magic study, these different roles in the kingdom and or realm, whatever you want to call it. And then the assumption is that you handle all those kinds of things, and there are tables on which you roll for like kingdom events, like, oh, was it a good harvest this year, or did something strange happen, was there a crime spike, whatever. um, and then the assumption is that some of the characters' time will be taken up, like, oh, we got to saddle up again because here's a problem that's facing us, and only the kings, only the player characters can handle those things, and those are the things that are the like 1-to-1 scale that's written in each of the books, and obviously those grow in like importance, and there's interplay between what the player characters do, like when their kingdom gets attacked for the first time by some probing forces from a neighboring realm, and the PCs have to go out and saddle up and deal with it. Well, that obviously has interplay with the bigger picture, the more narrative kingdom rules. So it sounds very similar, actually. This back and forth, and as the campaign continues, you move back and forth between I'm viewpoint through my character, and I'm viewpoint with the rest of the players looking at the big picture.
Yeah, that it does sound very, very similar, even with the tables and such, right down to that. So like the assets that you generate are random, the events are random, the points of interest that pop up are random, and so like it could be like a military type mission that pops up. It could be an exploration
Mhm.
mission that pops up. It could be a routine mission, right? Because the Federation still needs to
Yeah.
function.
Yeah, I got Federation stuff to do.
Yeah, and then there's also called unknown points of interest, which I really, really interesting. So like you get a random signal, you don't know what's there. You have to assign assets to it, but you don't know what it is until you've assigned your assets already. So that one's
Interesting.
kind of a good one.
Yeah, that sounds so much like, and I won't go on and on about
Yep.
Kingmaker, but there's so many things like you could roll on a table, and I actually remember in our campaign 10, 12 years ago rolling like, there's a crime spike in one of your cities, and we decided, hey, let's play a little bit of that out. Like
Yep.
how's law enforcement dealing with that? And so we went, I just made that up and we just worked through it. That's neat. I mean, and I think that the richest campaigns are the ones that and this is tough. It's really tough on a GM, but I think the richest campaigns are the ones wherein the world is active and evolving, and the world is doing things. There are things happening off the stage, and sometimes they're points of interest, and sometimes they encroach onto the stage, or the players on the stage decide we need to do something about that. And that's when it feels like it's breathing. I love that.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And like, if you don't deal with points of interest, sometimes your assets aren't usable next turn
Mm.
because they have to go deal with them, things like that. What's really, really cool is that the missions that you role play through
Mhm.
in the role play section have success and failure criteria that add bonuses to the overlay, the
Oh
strategic
wow.
overlay.
Okay.
So if you succeeded in doing such and such during the role play session, you get one more asset for the strategic session.
I
And
see.
then Michael Duxbury, who also wrote the last mission of the story, which takes place after all of the turns in the overlay have happened. He actually says, "All right, well, if you have assets left over, they're going to show up here. If you have momentum left over, it's going to show up here." And like all of this stuff comes together in the final role play experience, which is so cool.
So this is interesting because I think there's terrific opportunity in something that's very open ended and sandboxy, and I think that Shackleton Expanse is that. Like you can rearrange things and pick and choose. And I remember like a year or so ago when I was thinking about, oh, I'd like to run this with my group. We ended up shelving it and doing something different, but I remember looking through all the missions and looking at all the mission briefs and thinking about, okay, which ones do I want to do and in what sequence, and and so you have this wide open set of possibilities. There's a lot of opportunity in that. On the other hand, there's also a lot of opportunity in something that is more structured and not to say in a negative way at all linear. It's
Right.
you can loosen it, but if you just don't have the time or the inclination to build from all these separate pieces and parts. So when you talk about how this is more structured, it's more linear, it is more sequential, um, but it also sounds like it's really flexible. I mean, you could pick and choose what you want to add to it and when you want to zoom in and out.
Yeah, it is super flexible. In fact, you can just play through the story if you don't care for the strategy phase or the
Oh,
tactical overlay. You don't need to play that, right?
okay.
Vice versa, you don't need to do the role playing. If you just want to play like a Star Trek asset assigning activity, you could do that. Like just role play that section. The other thing that we did
Mhm.
is we made sure that like the random tables that are included in that strategy phase are universal and they're not necessarily just about the Federation Klingon War.
Okay. I was going to ask you about
So,
that
with the
actually.
exception of characters and ships, we did fill with people that were around during that time frame and ships that were around during that time frame. So, if you wanted to like literally take this overlay, move it to the Shackleton Expanse, and
Mhm.
run the Tillikal Saga with it would be super easy to do. You would just have to make up the character assets,
Okay.
and we provide the rules on how to do that, which is awesome.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that because I mean, like, how would you adapt this? How could you, in other words, based on what's in the book, and how would you yourself adapt this to another era? I mean, I was thinking, hey, you've got the Klingon War. I mean, this precedes the original series in terms of like the canon, quote unquote, timeline. But I mean, could you do this? Do you see this being adaptable to say the Dominion War, or adaptable to even earlier, like late Enterprise, the Romulan War? How flexible do you think it is, and how would you go about doing that?
I think it is pretty flexible, Jeremy. Like I was talking with someone about trying to do the Zindi War using the format. So the Klingon War is set up in three stages: early war, mid war, and late war, and each stage has three turns. Well, the Zindi War was a smaller type thing, so you might only do um, you know just one stage with maybe four turns in it. You know what I mean? And whereas if you go to the Dominion War, that's a lot longer. It takes place over several years. You've got pre-war stuff that you might want to make a part of it. And you can absolutely do that. The only thing that you would need to do or is look at the character assets, which is a D20 table, and come up with 20 characters who were around during the Dominion War, fill those out, come up with 20 ships that were around the Dominion War, fill those out, and then you can literally use the entire tactical campaign as it is. Or what I would probably do is I would probably, instead of early war, mid war, late war, I would probably add a pre-war and a post-war stage as well. And maybe keep 3 turns per stage as you travel through the war.
Yeah, I think that would make sense for the Dominion War, especially because of all the infiltration and the penetration perpetrated by the Dominion that set the stage for the war. You'd want to take that into account. Wow, that's fascinating.
Yeah, and so and then so on top of all of that, we include, gosh, probably 40 pages of optional rule sets that'll make your game feel more tactical, more like a tactical game. For example, like we put rules in there for rolling initiative. For those people coming from other games that prefer to have a rolled initiative. Really, really cool with starships, right? Because the smaller ships act first, the bigger ships act last, like things like that. Those optional rules are in there. One thing that I'm really proud of is that we got in the rules for power management, because power is just a number on your on your ship character sheet right now that really doesn't do much. But I put in a system where you assign those power points to each of your systems.
Did you play FOSSA Star Trek many years ago?
I didn't. However, I did do a lot of research into FOSSA and Starfleet battles.
Yeah.
And I was hoping that through introducing these rules, maybe it might bring in some people that played the old FOSSA tactical simulator or the Starfleet battles.
Because I remember, and I still have most of my FOSSA stuff, the core stuff. I have the big deluxe boxed set, and I remember the 1-page forms that had these little counters. You've probably seen PDFs of these, and you tracking how many shield points and this and that. And it felt, because it was tactile, it felt like you could suspend disbelief and like feel like you're moving stuff around on your control panels and whatnot. Interesting. Yeah. Okay.
I was thinking, like, if I was an engineer and I had the ship character sheet in front of me, I could just take a D6 and put like, oh, there's 2 power at this station, 1 power at this station, 2 power at this station, 3 here. And what happens is whenever you use a station to assist on a roll, it takes 1 power from that station.
That makes sense.
Yep.
That's simple.
And so it gives the engineer a lot more things to pay attention to and to do. Because I've heard a lot of people saying that their engineer doesn't do much when it gets to space combat. So I was all right.
It's tough. I think sometimes I think for really experienced and motivated Star Trek fans, there's always a thing to find. There's always something you can figure out to do. But Starship Combat does present a challenge with people who are less familiar with Star Trek. So they're like, what am I doing? We're in combat. I'm supposed to be pulling a trigger or something like that. If you're playing original series era, like, what does the communication officer do?
Right.
So
we also did, if you want to do mass combat, like 5 ships versus 5 ships or something like that, we wrote in rules. We adapted them from Homeworld, where each player can control 1 starship. Instead of focusing on what they're doing on the bridge, they're each controlling their own starship during combat. So lots of really cool options in there like that.
Well, I remember, was it the Command Division book that had some like vague ideas about running an Admiralty campaign?
Yeah. And they talked about wings and things like that. Yeah.
It sounds like you've taken that and fleshed it out with a lot more detail that you can act. Because I remember looking at that and thinking, okay, this is it was good, but I didn't feel like it was anything that like someone sitting at their table wouldn't have just kind of come up with anyway.
Yeah, I think
sounds like there's so much more.
Yeah, and if you read through the optional rules, it makes a lot of sense, especially if you're familiar with other game systems, because I really tried to look at a few when we were designing this. So
that's smart,
I'm happy
creates
with how
on-ramps for other people.
Right, because people coming in from D&D are like, wait, I don't roll initiative? How does that work?
Yeah. Why am I not counting squares?
Yep. Yep. Exactly that.
Yeah.
So
Um, let me see. Let me think here. So you think that this could be easily adapted to other eras, other events within Star Trek. There are, you can as you wish balance between the traditional one player, one character, call that the ground level versus the big picture, the admiralty level, the fleet level. You can go back and forth between that. And it sounds to me like then those rules, the rules that are for the bigger picture, are easily transferable to other big events, either that exist within Star Trek canon, or if you want to have your own crazy war or something like that, you could do that.
I would argue that they could also just be adapted to any 2D20 game.
Sure.
Like if you wanted to do the Butlerian Jihad for Dune,
Mm,
like, things like that, it would pretty easily adapt to that as well.
interesting. Now, okay, this is if you don't have an answer for this or you don't feel like answering it, I'll just edit this out. No one will ever know it was asked. Do you think that these rules could be adapted for not starship combat, but like ground combat?
Yeah, absolutely. I think they can. Yep.
Oh boy. Okay. Okay. See,
Yep.
I've been beating my head on a wall periodically over mass combat rules for my 2D20 fantasy game, Eris, and I have not been satisfied. I'm happy with the skirmish rules, like
Yep.
30, 40, but you get into like large army size, and I have not been satisfied with that. So okay, so that checks another box as to why I probably need to buy this book.
Yeah, and it what it becomes is your character is now a general of this unit
Right.
on this flank. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah,
that, and kind of controls those the way they are. You know what I mean?
that's interesting. Um, what kind of setting background? One of the is included in this book because I mean, obviously, it's about the Klingon War. There is an era. There's a set of years into which this plugs. I've always been happy with the story content, the world, the universe content that all these books have provided. I mean, you probably listened to when the Discovery campaign guide came out. Like I'm not a fan of Discovery actually, but I love the book. It's a terrific book. What kind of world background, and I loved reading that world background, is in this book? About how much?
So I'll be completely clear. There's not a ton,
Okay.
and because a lot of this information is already presented in the Discovery book,
Okay. Okay, that
we
makes sense.
didn't. Yeah, so like it happens during Discovery season 1. So we do provide a closer timeline of events of what happened during the war, and what happened to set off those events and what happened after. But we don't really delve into what's going on in the world of Discovery. And the reason why we did that, Jeremy, is because, and the reason why we chose this war in general is because we want this to become your story and not the story of the hero ship. Do you
Right.
know what I mean? Like Discovery is gone for 2/3 of this
Hmm.
war. So now there's plenty of space for us to create hero ships
Yeah.
with our players. And that's kind of our mindset when we were going into it, and really wanted to focus on the options. I would say the number of times Discovery is mentioned in this book is less than 20. Like it is, it does happen during that time frame, but yeah, we just wanted to focus on providing a war story for a hero ship that players create.
I think that makes a lot of sense. I mean, there's if you want to take part in someone else's story, read a book. If you want to if you want to be an active player at a table and you want to be a GM who enjoys, I came up with these ideas and I threw them at my players, and then my players confounded me by coming back with these responses, and we together built this thing that wasn't so, it didn't exist beforehand, and it took all of us to do. Yeah, you don't want to play through like, well, then you're going to have this battle and then this battle and then this battle, and this is where the existing hero ship comes and
Saves the day.
Elminster's, bails you out, shows up like Dungeon Master,
Yeah.
in the last, you don't want that. So
Yeah.
that's
I
cool.
remember there was a video game that I played on, it might have been Xbox or 360 or something like that, called like Middle Earth: The Third Age. And you were playing like an elf, a dwarf, a human that are going on this mission, but they weren't the main characters from Lord of the Rings. But every now and then their paths crossed those
Mhm.
main characters. And so like it was like they would go away from the Lord of the Rings story and then they would come back and then they would connect. So like I think that I remember fighting in the caves of Barad-dûr and seeing the main cast like run over the bridge
That's
up
cool.
above. Like and then they run off and they do their thing and then you have to finish telling your story. And I feel like that's kind of what this is set up like you are doing your thing. There are canon events that we call
Mhm.
scripted events that are either read out or handed to players or whatnot that happen in the series, so you can keep a sense of time,
Sure.
but you don't interact with those. They're just presented to you, so that you can tell where you are in the story.
Yeah, that's and what that does then is I think it gives the players an opportunity to feel like the line between what you're doing as a group at the table and what we've seen on the shows and in the movies, the line blurs, which I think then can inject some real energy and life and excitement into the table, but it doesn't allow you're not creating a situation where like, the canon characters show up as a little band of Mary Sues and solve everybody's problems and you're like, well, why am I here?
Right.
I'm just going to eat more popcorn and play with my phone some more. Why am I even sitting at this table? That's
Yep.
wow. Okay. Okay. So I'm jazzed. I was interested before, and now I'm feeling compelled. That's annoying because then that means I'll spend money. But that's okay. That's okay. Then that sends a positive signal to you folks in Modiphius to continue producing this good stuff. Let me ask you just a couple of things as we head toward wrapping up. What's maybe like your favorite character option, rule, idea, something new that's in this book that you're really excited about because you want to see what people do with it, or you're excited about using it yourself?
So I mean I did mention the power allocation
Mhm.
rules. I think that's really going to be
It
cool.
is. That's cool.
Um, but hidden in the chapter 7, I think it is, in the Starship chapter, I wrote the rules for swarms of ships. So
Okay.
if you want to play like a bunch, like a swarm of a bunch of little ships,
Hmm.
there are now rules for that where you create a scale for them and how it is to deal with them, because that has happened a couple of
Yeah, it
times
has.
in Star Trek. So we have rules there to kind of tell that type of story now. If you wanted to introduce, a species that prefers to use swarm instead of
Interesting.
big, huge starships.
Or just like little tiny like pinprick type ships against something bigger.
Hmm.
Oh, that's cool. Okay.
Yeah, in theory, you could even do a swarm of Galaxy class ships if you wanted to, if but that would be terrifying to see.
Yeah. That's a yeah. That's when yeah, that would be a little on the big side. Um, what do you plan on doing with this book yourself? With all your
Uh,
extra time?
right.
All your surplus time out there. What
So
do you think you're going to do with it?
here's the thing that's kind of cool. This book we started production over 2 years ago.
Oh,
When
you
we
folks keep
first
good
got these
secrets.
these tactical
You
rules,
keep good secrets. Yeah.
yeah, well, I mean, yeah, we try. So are you familiar with 5 parsecs from home and 5 leagues from the borderlands? Have you
I,
heard
I
of
have
those?
I have not played them, but I have a friend of mine who loves them a lot, and I've so I know something about them. Yeah.
So Ivan Sorensen, who wrote those books,
Hmm.
he was the one that developed the tactical system, the strategy
Oh.
phase.
Oh, nice.
He basically gave me a skeleton and
Hmm.
said, "Hey, I'm not super familiar with Star Trek. Could you take this and adapt it to Star Trek?" And I was like, "Absolutely."
You betcha.
So I kept in touch with him back and forth for about 6 months
Mhm.
during playtesting and whatnot. And I think we ended on something really, really cool. So what I would love to do, I would love to take just the Admiralty strategy phase tactical overlay
Mhm.
and create a Discord server where all the players on the Discord are working together as admirals, but then instead of assigning assets to the points of interest, we have people go in and use captain's log at each point of interest to
Oh,
tell their story about what's happening there. I would love to see something like that happen.
wow.
Again, that might be a bit more than I can manage right now, but I would love to do something like that.
And I was going to ask you about where do you see the potential for overlap between Captain's Log and this because like I have here full disclosure, I have neither did I run Star Trek? I don't know. No, actually, I have neither run nor played Star Trek Adventures in like, golly, like over a year and a half,
Yeah.
almost a year and a half actually. When we finished our a season of our campaign at the end of 2022, that was the last time I played it. And so Captain's Log has come out. Chris, my podcast buddy, and I have played. We played through a story, an episode of that. But every time I look in that book, I'm like, oh my gosh, one day when I'm running Star Trek Adventures again, this is going to be my little brain trust here. This is going to be my council of elders. I'm going to open up the little door and say, what the heck is going on this planet that they just decided to fly by? You know what? Um, yeah,
Yeah,
that
that's
would
the
be
best thing that Captain's Log is for. Like, hey, I need a weird animal for my players to see. They're stuck
right.
on this planet. Let's just roll a bunch of dice and see what it is.
Well, back to your idea of a like an Admiralty Discord campaign. It's interesting because it would take the idea of like a living campaign, like a managed living campaign, and it takes a different spin on it because it wouldn't be it'd be living, but it would be, I don't know what the word, it would be like a, you know, it's honestly, it sounds like a bunch of, I'm not a huge jazz fan, but it'd be a bunch of jazz musicians who are like, okay, what key are we going to start in?
Yep.
And they all kind of know what they're doing and they're all working from the same general framework, but everything is just improvisation within certain accepted limits moving forward. Wow.
Yeah, I think we could come up with there would be some really cool stories to come out of that.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, you know, what would be really cool with something like that too. And this is like, you know, the crazy, overly ambitious, time sucking, I need to be retired to do this GM ideas that I think we all have. Uh,
Someday.
that would be something that even someone who's not playing could just go through and read it and be like, oh yeah, I'm going to steal this idea and I'm going to be inspired by this idea. Wow.
Yeah, there's a lot of potential there. And
I
I'm
think
quite
so.
sure that there's going to be somebody out there who comes up with something that I never even thought of. You know what
Yeah,
I mean? Because that's what always ends up happening.
totally. I think that's wonderful though. I mean, when you take a creative idea and you throw it out and then other people go, but what about this? And you're like, oh my gosh, I would have never, I didn't even consider it from that angle. And then that gives you some inspiration that they didn't have. And then it grows.
Yeah. Yeah, this is a couple of cool things that I was happy about. Is this is the first book that right up front has a content warning
Okay.
for the Star Trek line, because I felt like if anything was going to need that, it was this book. And then we also have a player sensitivity checklist
Hmm.
to go over during session 0. Hey, what type of stories are you okay with during war? What are you not okay with during war? You know, things like that.
How much mass
So that
destruction can you stomach?
right. Yeah. Like,
Yeah.
I
Hmm.
don't want to see kids blown up.
Yeah.
Okay, we're not going to do that in this game. So
We're
I
not
was
going to talk
excited that we
about it
got
at
both of
least.
those in there as
Yeah.
well.
Okay. Interesting. Yeah. That's all right. So I'm officially excited. What is is this available now? Here it is at
So the
the end of
PDF is
February.
available. So if you pre-order through Modiphius, they'll give you the PDF as they
Okay.
normally do. It sounds like maybe towards the end of March the PDF will be on sale and the books will be here in the US, but that is always subject to change.
Sure, sure. So you're talking of this is like early spring.
Yes.
Early to mid spring is when we could expect maybe this mid spring that it'll start showing up in stores and we can leaf through it at them, things like that if they're not
Right.
shrink wrapped. Okay. Um, you know, it's funny as we're wrapping up here and we're talking about things that are available and what release schedules and whatnot. You know, we said we were going to mention this at the
We might
beginning,
as well, right?
and then we didn't, but we really need to. Here it is. It is 26 February on which we're recording, and I get hit with on the Modiphius Discord server the announcement of
Star Trek Adventures Second Edition, Phase 2 is coming. Yeah, how funny is that? That like 40 minutes before we go to click
yup.
record, like Discord's been blowing up, Facebook's been blowing up, but yeah. So a lot of people have been piecing together. Wait, What do you mean that the starter set is no longer available? What do you mean that the
It's not.
core rulebook is no longer in production?
Wait, hold the
Well,
phone. Because I haven't been playing it. So okay, I fortunately I have the original core rule book. I have the tricorder box as well, and I have the Klingon rule book, and I have the starter set. So the core rule book and the starter set are not in print anymore. Is that what you're saying?
yes, that
How
is
long has that
correct.
been? I had no idea.
Only for the last month and a half, couple
Okay.
months. Actually, the starter set might have been longer than that, but that
Okay.
there's been some people complaining about it online and
Wow.
asking if we were going to be going back to print on it and
You're
whatnot.
like,
Um,
Mom.
so the announcement this morning was that we are moving into a second edition. It is backwards compatible with first edition. It sounds like they announced that the core rule book will be available at Gen Con, with a starter set to follow a little bit thereafter. There's a site, if you go to Modiphius,
Mhm.
you can sign up for email updates, because it sounds like we're going to slowly reveal information over the next few months, as we start finalizing the product and the pitch.
Excellent. And I'll put a link to that page in the notes for this on both the pod and YouTube. And I just, as you were saying that, I scanned quickly over the email that I just got 37 minutes ago from Modiphius announcing this. Says it's backwards compatible and offers, quote, an updated and streamlined version of the 2D20 system rules designed for an authentic Star Trek experience. I won't ask you what that means because either
Yeah,
you
it.
don't know or you're not supposed to tell people what you don't. I'm not even going to pry.
Well, you can think. I mean, we use the word streamlined a lot
Sure.
in the past, so you can think about that. And yeah, the rules were still. I got to play test them for the better part of a
Oh,
year. I guess the play testing was 3 months. But yeah, pretty excited to see what they look like when they're all finally done. Um, the other thing is, with that, we've got the license for Strange New Worlds and
hmm,
Prodigy now. So
that's excellent. That's,
so
and
that's
it says that
exciting
in
too.
the email that you can play in any era, and it explicitly it name drops uh, those two as
Right.
being you can play in those worlds.
And the cover is beautiful. You got the shot of the Enterprise from Strange New Worlds, and was it not in the email?
Wait.
I'll send you
Oh no,
a
you
new
do. Yeah. Okay, so there is a picture of like this crew in all different eras uniforms on some strange new world, with the Enterprise in the background. That's what I'm looking at right here in the email itself.
Yeah, and I think the press release also mentioned that there'll be multiple species to play with from start, which is pretty cool. Because in the original core rule book, there were some species that you couldn't play as. It was very much this is a Starfleet point
Yeah.
of view. So now we're gonna open that up as well, which is
So
cool.
now, is this then? Does this? Do you know if this supplants the Klingon rule book?
So what I believe will happen is
Okay.
that all rule books will be usable depending on what edition you want to play.
Okay.
It's a very simple adaptation from 1E to 2E. And we even in the 2E core rule book have very specific, like do this, this, and this,
Okay.
and now you're okay to play second edition
Okay.
with your first edition stuff.
So it's
Um,
more like a couple. It's more. It sounds to me like you're saying it's tweaks, not like like modifications, like going from say AD&D to third edition or
Right.
fourth
It's not
edition
it's
to
not a
fifth
full scale
edition. Okay.
overhaul of the rules. Basically, it's been going on for 7 years. In 7 years, Modiphius has had a ton of books
They've learned a lot.
drop, and we've learned a lot of different things that were successful along the way. And so now we're trying to reincorporate that into a new vision with second edition. So
Very
yeah, I'm
cool.
I'm excited to see what people think as we start revealing more and more of the information. I don't know what that timetable looks like, unfortunately.
You have not been briefed in yet. You've
No,
not
I
been
got my
brought to a
talking points
secure,
this morning.
undisclosed location. What?
I got my talking points emailed to me this morning saying, "All
Okay.
right, here's the things that we're mentioning now. We'll figure out what's going on later."
Sure.
So
Well, right on. Okay, this is very cool, and it's two neat things that This is obviously way forward looking, but this Klingon War Book is far more immediate. So again, there are links to this Star Trek Second Edition announcement. I'll put links to the Klingon book on Modiphius' site there as well, and Al, thanks so much. I mean, like I said at
you
the
for
beginning,
having me.
thank you so much for your work in this stuff, because anything, we got good people pouring work into a great property that I think people are doing terrific things with.
Yeah, and I'd be remiss to not thank you for all the things that we went back and forth on with the world builder stuff too. Like that, everybody's still learning there, and so I appreciate that. Hitting you up and saying, "Hey, what do you think of this?"
Well, hey, absolutely. And you know what? If you could give me the magic trick for how do you proofread 200 some odd pages of your own text painfully? That's the only way you do it.
Really, read it out loud. That's the best
Oh,
you can do.
yeah, that's what I do. Yeah, that's a sad and true statement. Well, this is excellent. Like I said, thanks for your time. Thanks for your work. And maybe after this thing comes out and I get my hands on it, we'll do a follow up. We can
Yeah,
talk through some
absolutely.
things.
Anytime.
Because I would love to actually. I'm maybe this doesn't sound properly Star Trekian, but I'm really interested in this tactical system for the purpose of seeing how could you do that for like land warfare.
Yeah.
So, all right.
Awesome.
All right. So go out and buy Star Trek books, folks. Play Star Trek, watch Star Trek. It's good for you.
Thanks,
you. Al. Thank you, as always, for listening to Fluff and Crunch. You can join our Discord. You can subscribe to the podcast. You can subscribe to the YouTube channel, all through the links in the show notes. Thanks again. Have a great day. We look forward to talking with you.